I'm going to start out with, it's kind of a personal question this morning. I hope you're all comfortable with that. But how are you doing spiritually right now? You know, if you were to just kind of assess your heart, just look in the mirror at your own soul, as it were, and kind of evaluate, how am I doing right now when it comes to following the way of Jesus? And then kind of the natural follow-up question out of this, how do you know? You know, we actually asked this question right here in our small group a couple months ago. We were sort of in between studies, you know, in the summer. So we decided to just go around the room and answer this question right here. How am I doing spiritually? It's kind of a spiritual state of the ship address for each one of us, I guess, to just say how we're doing. And so what would you say if you were sitting in the circle with our group on that Thursday evening? How would you say that you're doing spiritually, and what criteria would you use to evaluate that? Now let's take this back just another step further, and that would be to our church. How are we doing spiritually right now? How do we, the community of Fellowship Bible Church, know how we're doing collectively? I get asked this question right here from time to time about our church. Actually, every single time I go to the dentist, believe it or not. My dentist is a Catholic man, and he knows that I'm a pastor at a church. So every time he asks me, I get in the chair. He's like, "Hey, how's the church doing?" You know, and I honestly I don't know how to answer him most of the time. You know, should I give him a weekly rundown of our attendance numbers? You know, or like the giving report from the update, talk about how many, you know, volunteers we have doing X or Y, baptisms from last year, or something like that? Or should we say simply, you know, we are doing great spiritually right now simply because we haven't had any major crises lately, right? No big split, no elder resigning in disgrace or something like that. Like, we're doing really well as a church. What should I say to him? You know, the good news is that most of the time, by the time I think of anything to say, his fingers are so far into my mouth that he can't understand anything that I'm mumbling at all. But, these are serious questions, and they're difficult questions, both for us as individuals and for us collectively as a church. How are we doing spiritually, and how on earth do we measure that? That is really where I think our passage comes in this morning. We're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, looking at verses 1 through 3. And in these 3 verses, Paul introduces a measuring stick. Really what I think that he would call the essential criterion for measuring spiritual growth, both of an individual or a congregation as a whole, a criterion that we almost always forget to even think about when we're doing this. You know, we don't see this criterion usually when you're reading through books on how to be a success as a church or lead a successful congregation. You also don't see this one most of the time when you're evaluating your own spiritual growth. It's not something that always pops into our mind. But in this passage, Paul makes it clear, one essential criterion, 4 letters, love. I'm just going to read the passage before us this morning, and I'm going to state the main point right from the get-go. So here it is, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. Paul says, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing." So here's the main point. Spiritual growth without love isn't spiritual growth. I'm going to say that again. Spiritual growth, in whatever way you want to measure that for yourself or the church, without growth in love is not actually spiritual growth. Because yes, you know, quiet times are great. If you're doing really good reading your Bible, that's awesome. Yes, attending church, giving sacrificially, all of that stuff, it's beautiful and important. But when it comes to spiritual evaluation, there's a better place to start, a place that really surprisingly, when we went around the circle in our group, not one person mentioned this criterion right here. There's a better place and a better way to evaluate our spiritual growth, and that's love. How am I doing loving those around me? That didn't even think to cross my mind when someone asked, how are you doing spiritually, Nate? I thought about, my quiet times and, what have I done lately that, seemed like a sacrifice, stuff like that. Love. How am I doing loving that person right there in my life, that person who annoys me? That is how you're doing spiritually, Paul says. That is how we are doing spiritually as a church. Spiritual growth measured in units of love. Now, of course, this is where we really need to define some terms, right? Because love has rightly been called the messiest word in the English language, the most abused and misunderstood of all the words that we use. In fact, a word that people have used to justify a whole lot of bad relationships, bad decisions, bad behavior, all sorts of bad stuff has been done in the name of love. So, a definition. This is a definition that it's just a very basic one. We're going to get a lot more into this in the coming weeks. But this definition passed on to me by one of my mentors, which he has modified from somebody else. Here it is. Love, in a Christian sense, simply a commitment to seek the best for another person. A commitment, meaning that this is an act of the will, not primarily of the emotions. To seek the best, meaning the best not as we define it, but the best as God defines it, as revealed in His Word for another person. Meaning that love is fundamentally other-centered, not self-centered. Now, like I said, a lot more could be said about that definition, but just let me point out this one key fact, I think, which is the most common misunderstanding in our culture in particular. Feelings are not that important in this definition of love. They can't be, actually, for Christian love. I was at a coffee shop last Saturday working on this sermon, and the guy who was making my coffee asked, "Hey, what are you going to be writing about today?" And I said, "Oh, I'm writing a sermon on love." And then I asked him, how would you define love? If you were to define it. He said, let me think about that for a while. And like 45 minutes later, he came over and he brought me this sticky note right here, and he said, "Here's my definition." He said, "Love to me is unconditional, a deep connection and affection toward another. Love is a bond unbreakable." It's not a bad definition, actually, but the part that I would push back on a little bit is that middle sentence, a deep connection and affection toward another. That, strictly speaking, really can't be part of the definition of Christian love, because radically and controversially, Jesus calls his followers to love all people. He even says, and maybe his most crazy command, love your enemies. Love that person you not only don't like, they don't like you and are trying to actively destroy your life, your enemy in a strong sense. Seek their good. Love them. So now this doesn't mean that you need to feel affection toward that person or feel like you have some sort of strong, unbreakable bond with them. This doesn't mean that you need to try to then really hard, manufacture some warmth towards someone who's actively, trying to destroy you. But you do need to show them love. You do need to will what is best for that person and their life and pursue it despite your lack of affection for them. So if that right there sounds absurd to you or impossible even, that's good, because that means you're starting to get this idea of what love is in a Christian sense. A commitment to seek the best for another person without conditions of any sort. So we're gonna leave this here for now, but stay tuned, because we're going to be doing a lot more of this. Next week, Bruce, a.k.a. Dr. Love, is going to be spending a whole lot more on the definition of love, right? What love does, what love looks like, what love is kind of how those next few verses are translated in your Bible. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's move on to the foundation of Paul's argument here, which is the necessity of love. three ways that he shows the necessity of love for the Christian life, and that is, number one, spiritual gifts without love are worthless. Verse 1, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. You know, this whole chapter right here in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13, so it's so beautiful, it's so poetic that, you know, oftentimes we hear this all the time, read at, you know, weddings and stuff, and for the most part, people, and Christians included, have really no idea that this chapter right here is actually just one part of this big argument Paul's making about spiritual gifts. You know, this is not the marriage section of the letter. Right? This is not the romance, husband and wife. Should I get married? Should I single? It's not even in that part of the letter at all. This is the spiritual gifts part. This chapter fundamentally is about life together as a church. That is why we have this chapter right here in our Bibles. Like I know for me, whenever I read this chapter, I always think back to that scene in A Walk to Remember where Landon reads this to Jamie on her hospital bed. I see a few smiles of recognition out there. I had a broken leg in the summer of 2002, and my sister Emily bought this video on VHS from the local Albertsons, and we wore that sucker out that summer. I was so sick of it. I still have flashbacks every time I see a temporary butterfly tattoo to just a certain scene in that movie. But really, one of the other more memorable scenes in this movie involves this passage right here. You know, Landon is holding this old, tattered family Bible, and he's just slowly reading the words from this chapter to Jamie as, you know, she's lying on her hospital bed. They're looking dreamily into each other's eyes, and then, surprisingly, the dying lovers launch into this nuanced but spirited discussion of the role of tongues in the church and spiritual gifts. It takes about 10 minutes, but it is a surprising and edifying twist in the movie. If you haven't seen it yet, highly recommend it. Well, if only, right? That I would have probably liked the movie a whole lot more if that had been the case. But no one ever thinks of this chapter right here in relationship to spiritual gifts. But that is why we have it. That's why Paul wrote it. That's why it's in our Bibles, not to, you know, inspire married or dating couples to pursue like this deeper romantic love in their relationship, but to instruct the church how to go about practicing spiritual gifts. Now, as you're going to see, this does certainly have relevance to marriage and to romantic love and dating love. So I don't want to just say, this has no relevance at all to that, but that's not as the primary meaning right here is for spiritual gifts within the church. All right, so first point right here, without love, gifts are worthless. That is the speaking in tongues of men and angels part that Paul's talking about. It's the gift of tongues, as it's most commonly called. Paul's already referenced this several times in the letter already, something we're really, 2 weeks from now, we're going to take a more in-depth look at, like, what is tongues? Should we be doing this today and all that? Bruce already touched on it last week. But basically for today, the word tongue means language. So speaking in the tongues of men would be probably right here the supernatural ability to speak in a language that you don't understand for the proclamation of the gospel. It's like what we see in Acts 2 in the day of Pentecost, where all of a sudden the disciples are preaching about Jesus and everybody's hearing it in their own language from wherever in the world they were from. They're like, wow, how do those guys know my language? Well, it's a miracle. It's the gift of tongues. So speaking in the tongues of angels here would probably mean the same sort of thing, but instead of, the supernatural ability to speak Italian or German or whatever, it would be speaking the language of the angels, right? So whatever sounds it is that angels use to communicate, that's what you would be using. If angels, in fact, do use sounds. That's a good metaphysical question that you could ask Jack Wilsey about after the service if you want to. But I should point out here, and this is really important, that can help answer some questions you might be having right now. Paul is speaking in the hypothetical right here. Even if, he says, right? And this is the same for all the rest of the stuff that he says in this. That he does not say that he actually is speaking in the tongues of angels, but if he did, it would be worthless without a spirit of love. It's like me saying, man, if I had $500, or even if I had $5 billion, but not love, it would be worthless. right? I don't actually have $5 billion, but if I did and didn't have love, what would be the point? Same with all the stuff that Paul's going to say in the rest of these verses. Having all knowledge is what he says in the next verse. Understanding all mysteries. Paul doesn't have that stuff. Only God has all knowledge, understands all mysteries. Give me my body to be burned. Also something that Paul has not actually done or is doing right now. So the point about this is that we can't take this as a description of Paul's actual state right now, nor a description of normal Christian experience we should all expect to have, because it's hypothetical. It's hyperbole to make a specific point right here. And the point is that gifts without love are worthless. Now, this was a major problem for the Corinthians at this time, maybe even the major problem that they might have been having, given the amount of space that Paul devotes to it in this chapter, because they were all about the spiritual gifts, right? They were all about having these flashy spiritual experiences and speaking in tongues and prophecy and all that, but really they were missing the key ingredient, and that was love. And without that commitment to the good of their fellow Christians, not puffing up their own status, all of these gifts are worthless. They're just empty noise. That's really what Paul's trying to get out there with that image of the noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Just, clatter, a bunch of noise. Has anyone ever been in or directed the percussion section of an elementary school band? Anybody? I was in one. Okay, Weston, awesome. Yeah, I was in one for 3 years. So I will tell you what, if you put a drumstick, or heaven forbid, a pair of cymbals in the hands of an eager fourth grader, the adjectives noisy and clanging will fall just pitiably short in describing that. I actually remember when my band teacher, when I was in fourth grade, she walked back to the back of the room. We're all, 17 of us percussionists were standing with our instruments, and she made a new rule that we weren't allowed to lift our striker more than 1 inch above any instrument that we were playing. Okay, whether it was the timpanis or the triangle or the snare drum, that's all the striking distance that we were allowed to have. And we still managed to make an enormous racket. And that right there, that sort of chaotic cacophony is exactly what Paul does not want to be happening in the church at Corinth, because spiritual gifts without a proper spirit of love are nothing but worthless noise. That's his point. Corinthians, take warning. Same idea in illustration number 2. Supernatural experiences without love are worthless. Verse 2, and if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I am nothing. And again, just like in the previous verse, Paul's talking hypothetical stuff here, right? Hyperbole, stuff that, obviously the Corinthians would love to be able to do this, and it all seems like really good spiritual stuff that, man, if you were doing this, you're really a varsity Christian at this point. But even these, Paul says, they are worthless without love. Prophetic powers here, meaning like direct revelation from God. Mysteries and knowledge, hand in hand in that. Understanding the deep structures of reality, things only known by the mind of God. Then the faith to remove mountains. Again, metaphorical hyperbole that goes back to the sayings of Jesus himself, that by faith in God and his power, his followers could do remarkable things, the impossible, even move mountains, as he puts it. Yet even if Paul could do all of this, even if you could do all of this, without love, it's all worthless. And look at how strongly and emphatically Paul makes this point. It's not that these gifts are nothing if he does all this, right? Not that they're worthless. He says, I am nothing in this verse. I, myself, as a person, amount to nothing if I do all this amazing stuff but don't have the gift of love that goes on with it. This is scary language right here. This is really judgment-sounding language. It reminds me of the words of Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 7. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works, that would be miracles or wonders, in your name? And then I, Jesus, will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Spiritual experiences, prophecies, exorcisms, miracles, even those done in the name of Christ, are not enough to prove that you truly know Jesus. Without love, you are nothing. and neither are dramatic sacrifices. Illustration number 3, verse number 3. If I give away all that I have, if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Again, notice this over-the-top kind of hypothetical language he's using. Paul has not yet given away all that he has. He has not yet given his body to be burned. But even if he had, he would gain nothing without love. That word for gain there almost always refers to heavenly reward, right? So this would be eternal gain, the kind that Paul says to live as Christ and to die as gain, meaning reward, the kind of reward that Jesus promises to give to people who make great sacrifices for him when it is coupled with a genuine motive of love. Again, this is something that Jesus makes really clear in the Gospel of Matthew from his mouth, straight from his mouth. If you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, you will get no reward. Matthew 6, verses 2 through 4. Thus, when you give to the needy, a great thing to do, I highly recommend it, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. A wrong motive. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you. So just like Paul is saying right here, Jesus is saying that there is a way to give, to make great sacrifices of your money or even of your body and have totally the wrong motive about it. Maybe self-promotion, right? Ego. Something as simple as the tax write-off, right? Whatever. If you give without anything less than a genuine motive of love, genuinely seeking the best for the other person with no concern for yourself, then you gain nothing. You've received your reward, Jesus says. Heavenly gain is reserved for those who act in love. So here's that main point of all this again. Spiritual growth without love isn't spiritual growth. Want to know how you are doing spiritually as an individual? Want to know how we are doing collectively at Fellowship Bible Church as a church? Then look at our love. Our spiritual growth will never exceed our capacity for seeking the good of the other person, period. I just kind of want to pause right here for a moment and reflect on how really radical and controversial and countercultural this would seem to the Corinthians, and really how countercultural this is for every single one of us still here today. Because the Corinthians lived in this culture where performance was everything. You weren't living unless you were killing it, right? As Bruce said a couple weeks ago. Killing it in business. Killing it with your family. Killing it, most importantly, in all these social games and social maneuvering that the Corinthians were all about. You were nothing unless you were at the top, or at least climbing closer to get there in Roman culture. So that is how they measured value, performance. Which means that when it came to other people and how they saw other people in their lives, they were valued not for their inherent worth as persons created by God, but they were valued for what these people could get you. You know, either as stepping stones that could maybe help you move up toward your goals and get what you want, or obstacles in the way that needed to be removed by whatever means possible. So the question is, are things that different right here, right now, Tacoma, 2018, and the way we see our lives, measure value, see others? You know, I don't think so. I think there's a very strong pull in our culture to continue to measure ourselves and measure other people by Corinthian standards. You know, most of us here actually live under an intense burden of pressure to perform in some way or another, to be just, a top-notch mom, maybe, or top-notch student, or brother, or boss and employer, whatever. To meet certain goals or expectations that maybe we've put on ourselves or other people have put on us, and feel like a failure up and down all the time, whether we're meeting those or not meeting those. Maybe some of you couldn't actually sleep last night because of this pressure, because you were just thinking about, man, what I got to do on Monday morning and the week after that and the week after that. And it's all just kind of building on you all of the time. This is real pressure. And it gets back to the way we measure value. It's the path that so many of us walk day after day after day in our performance-obsessed culture. But thanks be to God, what Paul shows us right here in this passage is a better way. It's how he introduces this whole discussion, actually, back at the end of the last chapter, because the Corinthians are on this very hamster wheel that I just described. It's trying to out-achieve and outperform one another, seeking desperately to win this game of spiritual one-upmanship. And in all this chaos, Paul says this. It's the last verse of chapter 12. It's the introduction to our passage right here today. But I will show you a better way. But I will show you a better way. And that way is what we see right here. The way of love. The way that is not defined by performance. A way that is not defined by the end result, but a way that is focused on process and motivation. The better way that really, when you get down to it, causes those self-imposed feelings of pressure to evaporate in the light of God's love for you through Jesus. So here's that better way summarized in a sentence. It is joyfully accepting the unearned love of Jesus so you can give it away to others. I'm going to say that again because there's 3 fill in the blanks there on the back of your handout. Joyfully accepting the unearned love of Jesus so you can give it away to others. This really is the better way. It's the way that we see modeled over and over again in the Bible, in the life of Paul, in the life of Jesus, in the life of every person who truly encounters the life-changing grace of God through the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to zero in on one example right here. It's a case study, if you will, that really illustrates this better way, the transformative power of love, the story of Zacchaeus. This case study is found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, and I'm just going to read the story now, and then I'm going to make 3 observations about the nature of love that can free you from the pressure to perform and open the door to the better way of evaluating success that Paul describes in this passage right here. So here it is, Luke 19, 1 through 9. He, that would be Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. He was short. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. That was Jesus was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up into the tree and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he, Zacchaeus, hurried and came down and received him, Jesus, joyfully. And when they saw it, this would be all the crowd around there, they all grumbled, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So here's really what I hope that you notice in this story right here. It's a cycle we see over and over again in the Bible, a cycle that I hope that you see in your own life, the cycle of love. Zacchaeus accepts the love of Jesus, the love which he did nothing to earn, and then he freely passes it on to others. This is receiving. This is understanding. This is giving. This is what spiritual growth really looks like, the better way that Paul is emphasizing in this passage. So, when it comes to evaluating ourselves, when it comes to evaluating our church, this is the lens we must look through, the lens of transforming love. So let's do that now. The way I kind of want to end this thing is I want us to look at this case study of Zacchaeus, and then I want us to look at ourselves. How are we doing when it comes to living out this cycle of love? First step being accepting. Do you know the love of Jesus? You know, and this first question here, it's so basic, but so essential, because love in the Christian sense, the love that we defined at the beginning, that does not come naturally for human beings. It's not something that we do automatically, like a default setting on us when we're born. Our default setting is the opposite of love. It's selfishness, seeking the best for ourselves. That's what we do naturally. C.S. Lewis describes this in Mere Christianity. He says, love, in the Christian sense, does not mean an emotion. It is a state not of the feelings, but of the will. That state of the will which we have naturally about ourselves, we naturally want the best for ourselves, but must learn to have of other people. This does not mean that we like ourselves, but merely that we wish our own good. Again, notice those important distinctions that we talked about a little bit at the beginning. Christian love is not primarily an emotion, though it can definitely involve emotions. Emotions aren't a bad thing. And Christian love is not natural. Love is learned. Love is learned. This is true of all love in a sense, not just Christian love in the highest sense. I mean, you've probably heard of what psychologists refer to as attachment disorders among children and adolescents. It's a truly tragic condition that's caused by abuse in a lot of cases, or neglect in some cases as well, like if a baby isn't held as an infant, or if a child is just mistreated or ignored through certain essential developmental phases. And when these most basic and essential aspects of human-to-human love are denied to these children, I mean, the effects can be long-term and they can be terrible. You know, the most dramatic cases are what have been referred to as feral children. Children who have been, really so unloved or so neglected by other people that they're almost incapable of relating to other people as humans, at least at first. They're wild, in a sense, aggressive, very fearful. Feral is the term that used to be given to this condition. And that's because love is a learned behavior. We learn it first in the arms of our father or mother or the person giving us care. We learn it in the way that others treat us. And according to the Bible, the path to learning true Christian love comes only one way, and that would be in the arms of Jesus Christ. 1 John 3:16, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. So in a spiritual sense, it's like every human being is born as a feral child, alienated from the love of God. We're adrift in this dog-eat-dog world of darkness where, you get what you deserve, you give what you deserve, the darkness of sin, eye for an eye, justice, revenge, backbiting, using people as objects, tools to get you what you want, manipulation. That is our default setting. That is all that we know apart from the love of Jesus Christ until we find Jesus. Or rather, better way to put that, until Jesus finds us. And in him, only in him, do we find what love truly is. The cross of Christ is the premier example of love. What Jesus did when he died. Not seeking his own good, but the good of many. Bearing our sin on his body, bearing our guilt before his Father, all so that we could have his reward, life forgiven, life forever, all earned by him, but given to us without conditions. That is how we know what love is. Look to the cross. Look to Jesus. That's what John is saying in that verse. So really, the first essential question we must ask when it comes to evaluating ourselves is do we know the love of Jesus? That really was Zacchaeus' problem at the beginning of the story, right? He simply had never yet encountered this love of God as expressed to him in the person of Jesus, this man who stops and calls him out of the tree, who knows what Zacchaeus has done, yet still chooses to move toward him in love to the shock and dismay of everyone around them, right? That is the starting point for the cycle of love, the starting point for this better way that Paul describes right here, not doing anything, but simply receiving, accepting by faith this extraordinary invitation of Jesus that he offers to anyone who will take it, including people like Zacchaeus, anyone. And that's because this love is unearned. Really, the next question is, do you understand the love of Jesus? Again, it's so clear in this story of Zacchaeus that, he and Jesus have no background with each other. Jesus is just, passing through this town that this guy lives in. And Zacchaeus is a tax collector, right? He's this universally despised figure among Jews at the time. He was despised for being a collaborator with the Romans on the one hand, collecting their taxes, serving as a tool of the oppressors. But then he's also despised for being a crook, for cheating people. He's rich because he's probably padding his own pockets with a little extortion, right? Little slush fund on the side for the tax collectors. This would be a man certainly considered undeserving of love, a sinner, as he's labeled by everyone in the story. But there it is, the invitation. Zacchaeus, come down, for I must dine at your house today. The love of Jesus is unearned. The love of Jesus is offered regardless of your behavior. That's so important to understand. Regardless of what you've done in the past, regardless of what you will do in the future, that is what it truly means to be unconditional. Now, the reason this is so important, because if you don't understand this aspect of Jesus' love, you will never give love to other people the way that you should. Like, if you think that somehow you have earned God's love, that like you're good with God and Jesus wants to be with you because you've done enough good stuff to other people, or you've given enough of your money, or that you've kept away from sin long enough that now God is really pleased with you, then guess what? You are going to expect the same from other people. I earned God's love, so you must earn my love, even just to a little extent. And what happens is it hardens your heart. You turn into the elder brother in the story of the prodigal son. You don't understand the Father's love, so you don't give others love the way that you should as well. Very important. Which brings us to the third step in the cycle of Christian love, which is to give. Do you appreciate the love of Jesus? I just love how this story of Zacchaeus ends. He's paying everyone back, even fourfold of what he might have cheated them. Wow, that is generosity. This is transformation. Not just not stealing anymore. If the story of Zacchaeus ended like, hey, I'm just going to not steal anymore and I'm going to be the best tax collector I can be. That wouldn't be the transformation Jesus is looking for. He takes him all the way to now giving, generosity, the true opposite of stealing, the gift of love that proves his reception of love. Which is why right there, it's at that point, after Zacchaeus says that Jesus declares his salvation, one of the last sentences in the story. Today, salvation has come to this house. There is nothing better that Jesus could ever say to you, to your household, to anyone. Today, salvation has come to this house. And that's because right here with Zacchaeus, his expression of love has proved his reception of love. That is the idea here. Your reception of love, your expression of love proves your reception of love. If you're not giving it, you may not have actually received it. If you're having trouble loving someone else, the key to getting better at it is not willpower, all right? Like, you just got to sit around and conjure up this ability to somehow love this person now all on your own. That's what I got to do. No, Christian love is not something that we manufacture, meaning something that just originates within our hearts and then we produce it and give it out to other people. No, Christian love is all transferred love. Meaning it's given to us to give out to other people. We don't conjure up Christian love, we receive it. We don't generate Christian love like a little turbine or something. We conduct it like a wire that's connected to the love of Jesus through us to other people. We love because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19. Freely we've been given, so freely we give out. And if you don't do this, if your life is not marked by this commitment to seeking the good of others above yourself, it's a caution for you. That's kind of one of the big points of the whole letter of 1 John. It is quite possible that you don't actually know the love of Jesus in the first place if your heart is cold toward other people. It's kind of the implicit warning in this section too, this call for the Corinthians to examine themselves and see if they are truly in the faith. Not according to their gifts, not according to their performance, not thinking, oh man, I'm definitely great with God because I do this miracle, or I have this special spiritual gift, or I'm in church all of the time, so I'm definitely good. No, not according to the stuff that you value, that you look to for significance, but two simple questions, the criteria of love. Do you receive the love of Jesus? Do you pass it on to others? That really is the Christian life. So really, this passage is not so much a call to self-evaluation, but really to a re-evaluation. Evaluation by a different standard, the better way of finding meaning and worth, love. This passage is a call from Paul to these status and performance-obsessed Corinthians to get off the hamster wheel. To abandon their idea of success and adopt a different set of criteria entirely. The criteria of love, this better way of joyfully receiving the unearned love of Jesus so you can pass it on to others, that is the way of peace. It's the way that Jesus walked for us. It's the way that Jesus walks with us. It is the better way of a life full of love and, believe it or not, free from pressure. That's where you end up if you truly say, I'm just going to adopt this better way. Because guess what? To all you high schoolers out there, if you got straight A's this year but had not love, you'd be nothing. If you got into every college that you applied for but had not love, you'd gain nothing. If your soccer team won every game, if you got voted homecoming queen, if you everybody in school knew your name but had not love, none of that would matter at all. And if you know this love, this love of Jesus that is given to you without cost, then already you have everything. Freely you've been given, now freely you can give. This is your criteria for success. To all the women out there, if you had the perfect home but had not love, you'd be nothing. If you landed the job of your dreams with the salary of your dreams but had not love, you'd gain nothing. If you had the perfect kids, perfect husband, perfect reputation, but had not love, none of it would matter because none of that stuff defines your worth. These are all Corinthian standards. They're not God's standards. You are loved by Jesus. You give that love to others. That is the criteria for success. That's what it looks like to be killing it. To the men out there, if you had perfect health but had not love, you'd be nothing. If you were the envy of all your friends for your performance at work or at the YMCA sports teams or any of that, but had not love, you'd gain nothing. If you had a new bass boat, new truck, new 5-car garage to put it all in, but had not love, none of it would matter because none of that is your criteria for success. Are you loved? Do you love others? Men, that is the successful life. That's what it looks like to be a winner. And finally, to us as a church, if we at FBC had the best programs in town but had not love, we'd be nothing. If FBC shared the gospel with more people than any other church in Pierce County, but we had not love, we'd gain nothing. If we had the best preaching, best website, best secretary, which I think that we actually do, but if we had not love, none of that would matter. Because in the end, only 3 things of value for Fellowship Bible Church remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. This is the better way. Let's all walk in it together. Pray with me, please. Father, if we could only get a glimpse of 1% of your love for us, the way that you love us despite our failures, despite our rebellion, the way you love us through Jesus, I know that it would transform us in ways that would last the rest of our lives. By your Spirit, help us see. By your Spirit, help us see the love of Jesus so clearly demonstrated on the cross, this love that transforms us. And through that transformation, may we be mediums of your love to everyone around us. All the people who dwell in darkness, may they see the light of your grace through us. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, amen.
And I'd like to say something in love here, Nate.